Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. Ambassador Gavin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Shaheen, distinguished members of the committee. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to appear before you and discuss the very complex and challenging set of issues the U.S. confronts. I also really want to thank the staff. I do know from personal experience how much work goes into preparing for these hearings.
I bet you do.
And I'm grateful for that as well. Obviously, the role of Congress in Africa policy has a really long history. It's often been an oasis of bipartisan cooperation. It's one reason I enjoyed working on it for so long. And there are sort of numerous historical examples of Congress really elevating issues that sometimes a busy executive branch is perhaps neglecting. So, of course, as has been discussed, the forces pulling the Horn of Africa apart are gaining strength. There are very real, imminent threats to stability in several other East African countries. Nothing is more searing than Sudan's shockingly destructive war, which shows no sign of ending. The recent wave of drone attacks on Port Sudan, along with the RSF's sustained pressure on El Fasher, confirm that it is indeed possible for this terrible situation, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, to get even worse. And famine, on a scale the world has not seen in decades, remains not just a possibility but a likelihood. We have multiple civil conflicts persisting in Ethiopia, and Prime Minister Abiy's ambition to regain a presence on the Red Sea has raised tensions with Ethiopia's neighbors. Of course, my colleague is absolutely right. Somalia continues to struggle for a modicum of effective governance while battling al-Qaeda's largest global affiliate, al-Shabaab, and dealing with a chapter of the Islamic State. So China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Iran, all of these states are active in the region. Many are very clearly thinking about their relationships in the Horn of Africa through a long-term strategic lens. They're investing in influence. And because their interests are not always aligned, they're sometimes engaging in proxy conflict. And we see this very clearly in Sudan. It's frankly less clear that the United States has a strategic vision for its relationship with the region. Long-standing problems of understaffed embassies and insufficient prioritization of African issues have joined the immediate shock of these very abrupt changes in foreign assistance and international humanitarian aid delivery to make it very easy for adversaries to paint the United States as uninterested and unreliable. Other anti-American messages capitalize on the fact the U.S. has been the most powerful country in the world throughout the post-Cold War era, and they tend to paint Washington as the enforcer of a painful, unjust status quo, which is one reason there's enthusiasm for BRICS in the region, and one reason I'm concerned about the cuts to Voice of America, which has provided some alternative perspectives on global issues. So this widespread perception of disengagement exists despite the fact that the United States, as you rightly noted, has very clear vital interests in this part of the world, not least the free flow of commerce through the Red Sea and combating terrorist organizations with very well-documented intent and, in many cases, experience, track records of doing so, of harming Americans. So part of the problem is uncertainty about just what the U.S. wishes to see in the region, what kind of East Africa is in the U.S. interest. Right? We would certainly benefit from a region at peace with capable governments that can be partners in addressing existing and emerging threats. We would benefit from a region with growing economies that can become trading partners, attractive investment destinations, potential collaborators in new enterprises. And we would benefit from a region, vitally, that is not beholden to U.S. adversaries or mortgaged to deep-pocketed external actors whose interests do not always align with ours. And so to pursue this vision, the United States needs to prioritize conflict resolution and conflict prevention. If these seem expensive. I think we've seen through this exercise with the Houthis in Yemen that it's far more expensive to actually have to turn to military action to protect our interests. The United States should avoid, I agree, an over-reliance on personal relationships with any specific regional leaders. Of course, the United States cannot simply impose its will on other states, but there can be no delegating responsibility for pursuing U.S. interests to any partner, not in East Africa and not in the Gulf. And finally, the United States needs to develop and pursue a Red Sea regional strategy, not a set of a la carte deals that transcends our own bureaucratic divisions that put Africa in one basket and the Middle East in another. For several years, I've served with other former U.S. officials on the U.S. Institute of Peace's Red Sea Study Group, which has advocated for this kind of more comprehensive approach to the region. A successful new security architecture would have to take all relevant equities into account. Thank you so much again for the opportunity. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. We're now going to go through a 5-minute question round, 5 minutes each, to each of the senators who wish to participate. And I'm going to start. And I have to tell you that watching President Ruhudo with the Chinese holding hands and talking about a new world order is just stunning. After all the work and effort we've put in there, and to see him talking about a new world order, you know, the new world order was constructed by the United States and democracies, capitalist countries that are human rights loving countries, and the new world order that these countries are talking about is being constructed by the autocracies, the outright communists, socialists, people who have no respect for human rights. It's stunning to hear countries talk about wanting to join or promote that world order when the world order that was constructed after World War II has served us so really well. Certainly not perfectly, but then again, the world isn't a perfect place, but so much better than what you'd see if the autocrats took over. It's discouraging to hear that, and part of it, I think, is tied to the fact that when we do things in Africa, they seem to be individual-centric instead of a country-centric. We don't focus on institution, we focus on individuals. And I don't know why it seems to be more prevalent in this part of the world than others. So if each you could take a quick run at a very complex question. So why don't you start?
Thank you, Chairman. I agree. President Ruto's comments were discouraging. They're not also out of the ordinary for the types of comments that Afghan leaders make, especially when they travel to Beijing, unfortunately. This is a challenge for the United States. I would suggest that Afghan leaders haven't always thoroughly thought through the consequences of this different type of world order, especially smaller countries that are smaller military or economic powers. The type of world order that China, Russia, Iran are advocating for would mean that they would be victimized probably in many ways. The grievances that Afghan leaders often express are focused on a few key issues, and then I think these larger powers like China, like Russia, like Iran, have co-opted those issues into their broader agenda to confront the United States. I think the U.S. Should make it clear to Afghan leaders that while, of course, they're welcome to have normal relations with these countries, especially if you're a major non-NATO ally, there are certain responsibilities associated with that. And I think the U.S. needs to be much more aggressive in its messaging, frankly, to Afghan publics and to Afghan leadership about the benefits that you laid out of the world order that the United States has underpinned for decades now.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think you hit on something that probably deserves more thought and more attention, and that is the fact that this is the kind of thing that they're used to. And the reason they're used to it is they see it all over the continent, and they don't have the cadre of people that study in the United States like most other continents do, really. I mean, China, for example, has got hundreds of thousands of students studying here, and Europeans are notorious for having lots of people here. So they're exposed to a different type of government, I think. Ambassador, your thoughts?
Thank you. That's such an interesting last point. I couldn't agree more that bringing more African students to the U.S. Would absolutely be in U.S. interest. We've seen time and again how it can pay dividends down the line, although it's very difficult actually for a lot of Africans to come do university and graduate studies here right now.
And the thing that strikes me too is when we deal with leaders, as all of us do, from all over the planet, it always amazes me how how good their English is, most of them. And you ask them why, and they studied here in the United States. People who are coming up through those other countries are sent by their parents or their government or something to study here. And the result is they take home the view of how important human rights are and how important democracy is. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you completely. I do think there's kind of an inflection point in many parts of the continent right now because you have these very young populations that are now urbanizing, digitally connected. There's a lot more political volatility. And so part of what I think is happening is a demand-driven desire for an international order that takes African equities into account, this sort of awareness that the Bretton Woods institutions were created right before most African countries were independent. And then that is capitalized on by U.S. adversaries, right, to distort the message to the U.S. wishes to keep African populations in poverty, or that's more or less the thrust of it. There's also the fact that money talks, and for a lot of these African leaders, they're dealing with tremendously constrained fiscal space. They have big debt burdens, and the way the U.S. Provides assistance in ways that we can be accountable to the American taxpayers, it's a little bit different dealing with the Chinese or with some of these Gulf actors who've been gaining influence. And so the last thing I would say is that I couldn't agree more that it's really important to keep an eye on the internal dynamics in these countries for the U.S. to understand and have strong contacts and relationships with actors outside of government, because leadership changes are going to happen, and these investments in these one-to-one personal elite relationships will not serve our interests. They'll have a sell-by date, and we'll be left in the cold.
Well, appreciate that, and appreciate the remark you made about the fact that money talks, and we wind up with that all over. It's hard to explain to people that there's a real difference between capitalism and socialism. Where the government owns the capital and owns all the money, it's easy for them to spread it out in other countries as they deem appropriate, whereas in capitalism, you need the profit motive and the free market system to back you up. With that, Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. You both mentioned messaging, and Gavin, you mentioned concerns that we are shutting down Voice of America and other information ways that we can message into places like the Horn of Africa. Can you talk about what we lose when we do that? And I'm going to ask both of you this question because we had a hearing in this committee at the beginning of the year, and one of the things that one of the witnesses told us is that the PRC is spending over $1 billion a year just on misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Much of that obviously is going into Africa. So what's the impact of that, and what's our alternative if we shut down all of our organizations that allow us to correct inaccurate facts, to correct the misinformation campaigns that the PRC and Russia and other adversaries are doing? You want to begin? Sure.
I think it's actually incredibly important because it's not just the PRC. You're absolutely right. They've made massive investments in media on the continent, including hiring local reporters who then are delivering state-approved messages and slants on the news. I think that the U.S. has a role to play both in supporting independent media in this part of the world, investigative journalism. This is how one has accountability and more connectivity, right, between populations and their leadership. And I think when we are absent, it is, again, just incredibly easy to caricature the U.S. as uninterested or worse, having some kind of malign interest in the region. And I've been looking at African social media discussions pretty intently for several years as part of a book project. And, you know, the Russians, they too have their own influence campaigns that are very, very popular. And the messages are, you can see why the messages would be appealing. The messages are about respect for African lives and sovereignty. They're about addressing the frustration that African countries are rich in resources and yet people can't find jobs. Having an absence of both straight reporting and clear messaging about what the U.S. is trying to achieve, there's then just a vacuum. And there we are with adversaries quite busily filling it.
Thank you. Mr. Servi?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I would like to see American embassies be more proactive in this space, coordinating their messaging or maybe receiving messaging from Washington. I don't know exactly how it would look, but there are moments